Hi, so welcome back to the Warlock's Tower. Today I'm going to talk to you about a path of magic which initially I just dismissed. I wasn't a fan, and recently I've changed my mind and think I might be running this pretty soon. So I'm going to do the usual, talk a little bit about the lore itself, and then talk about potential applications for it and things that I can see it being used for. So let's get right into it. So one of the first reasons I dismissed this is when I first started playing Ninth, I was fairly phobic of the miscast table, using all the things, the sort of inevitability of if you hit a 20, the wizard just going, and it seemed really, really nasty. So I was kind of nervous about the miscast table, and no earthing rod to allow you to re-roll it. Having played Bretonnians in 8th edition and always had my units get smashed up by my own miscast if it ever went wrong, I was kind of thinking, God, making your own miscast even worse would be terrible. So the fact you count it's using one magic dice more if you miscast just seemed like a really terrible thing to me. The reroll ones seem really good. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good. So it just gives you that extra assurance that you're not going to double one a spell and fail it when you really shouldn't. But that little boost is good. It does make you even more likely to miscast a spell, but it's not a massive increase in the chance. But so yeah, next into the next thing. So I guess this is first impressions count, hey, and the next thing about Thaumaturgy lore, the next step down as you look at the lore itself, it's there's no attribute, there's no trait, and there's no zero spell. So you don't get any of those usual bonuses. I'm particularly always interested in the zero spell when I look at a path or a trait spell, because you're guaranteed to get those. So if you've got one of those that's good, at least you've got something useful. You can't roll really badly with your wizard spells and end up with absolutely nothing. So that's what I was always keen to look at, and Thaumaturgy not having that kind of really felt like a real negative, a really big negative. So yeah, that's another thing that put me off. But let's start looking at the spells themselves and see if we can find any upsides. So as you can see, Hand of Heaven, it's pretty cheap to cast. It's 5+, it's D6 strength, D6 hits. So you're looking at 3.5 strength, 3.5 hits. So it's going to kill a few chaff. It's not going to change the game immediately, but it's going to chip away. Boost up to a 9+, so it's an extra dice you probably have to throw to get to that point. And it's D6 plus 1, D6 plus 1. Now that doesn't seem a huge change, but the extra on the strength, yeah, that makes a difference. So it could well be worth boosting up to a 9+ if you definitely want to get that extra model off. There's 3 horsemen stood in front of your unit with like a 5+ armor save, and you want to clear them out of the way. Yeah, that extra +1 is going to make you that bit more certain of getting rid of that unit. So it's a good spell. It's not a great spell, and nobody's going to get overly excited for rolling a 1 on Thaumaturgy, but no one's going to be devastated either. So it's not a bad spell. The next spell I really like, Cleansing Fire. Again, when I first looked at this spell, I was underwhelmed. I just thought, well, yeah, it's all right, but is it really going to be game changing? It's a 6+ to cast it on the caster themselves. So you got to be pretty close up to your opponent, because you get the breath weapon special rule. So you've got to be within 6 inches. Again, I was thinking, do you really want your wizards to be within 6 inches of the enemy? But yeah, maybe you do. Maybe they're a vampire lord. Maybe they're a Skaven or a bell smashing into the unit, and with a big ranked up unit, maybe they're a chaos warrior wizard, which I've been looking at them, and you can get a pretty decent save on those guys. So maybe that's worthwhile. It's the strength of the breath weapon. It's D3 plus 2. So it's reasonable. It's not amazing. You could pop a 5. What is nice is that you get to know the strength of the breath weapon before you decide its target. So if you're stood there and there's a load of skinks and a load of saurus, if you do only have strength 3, and you think, oh, well, I'm not going to kill that. It's 3-up rerollable armor save, so I may as well blast it into the skinks. But you get that strength 5, and you think, oh yeah, well, I'll go into that tougher better armor save target. So the fact you roll the D3 immediately is really good. I think that's a real big bonus. Now on a 10 plus, which is a big jump from a 6 plus, you know, that's an extra possibly 2 dice. It's can go 24 inches augment, which is huge range. Goes to characters, champions, and single models, but that's really handy. So you've got a fell beast looking at a unit and it's fell charge, it's only sat 6 inches away, you can blast away with this, that's pretty handy. But where I see it being a really big benefit is almost use it as a augment. So you put it into a unit that's in combat, whether that's your caster or another unit. So I have my Demon Prince trying to get through a heap of Saurus Warriors. Well, if I could give him a breath weapon, or even a breath weapon every turn, yeah, that would chew through those units, break steadfast much quicker. So that's a great use of this spell. I could really see using it as a buff. So yeah, really like Cleansing Fire. Next, Trial of Faith. So this is the spell in all of 9th that I think will draw scrolls out. This is a spell that's gonna scare people. One of 2 in the lore, which is a real gonna bring out dice, gonna bring out scrolls. So on a 7 plus, it's only got a 12-inch range. So again, you probably want a pretty survivable character, pretty mobile character, because that's pretty short range. Admittedly, on 11 plus, it's 24-inch range, but that is throwing quite a few dice at, and obviously with Thaumaturgy, having that judgment on high, giving you the extra dice if you do miscast it, that's a bit of a risk. But to have a character in a unit rolling a d6, potentially most characters got 3 wounds. So if I get a 1, if I get a 6, I'm almost certainly killing your character, because arm piercing 6. So you've got to ward or some magic resistance to make it worthwhile, make you survivable. So yeah, I like that spell. That's going to scare Vampire Lords. It's going to scare Slans. It's going to scare a lot of people. So yeah, that's a great spell. And relatively cheap on a 7 plus, but obviously, yeah, you've got to be pretty up close and personal to do that. But I can definitely see that if you've got a character who's running away, hiding behind hills and stuff, you can just walk up onto the hills and it effectively gives you a really nasty shooting attack to pick out that character, go into that bunker of troops, which otherwise you couldn't. The next spell is one which I consider to be very situational. It really depends who you're fighting, how useful this spell is, and that's, to my mind, why you wouldn't necessarily take Thaumaturgy on a wizard with a single spell. So because you've got no 0 spell you can drop to, and you just roll Speaking in Tongues against, say, dwarfs, where almost everyone is leadership 8, 9, 10 anyways, is it really that useful? Where it does become useful is if you've got armies like Greenskins, like Warriors of Chaos, like Skaven to some extent, we've got very variable leaderships, and then, you know, if you've got a Chimera that stood next to a Chaos Lord, it's leadership 9 or 10, suddenly you're dropping it to leadership 4. That's a big change. If you've got Trolls, that's a huge change. Peasants in an Ecatane list, because they can take Inspiring Presence from the Knights as well as from the General, again, a huge change. So in those situations, it's a great spell. Day to day, every day use, it's potentially useful, it's potentially terrible. If you're going into a combat, you're going to win by 1 or 2. Then if you can drop a block of warriors, of dwarf warriors, down from leadership 10 to leadership 8, then that's pretty good. So yeah, I can certainly see its uses, and when it is useful, it'll be really useful, but it's an odd sort of spell. But I do like it as a spell. So Smite the Unbeliever, another odd sort of spell. So 11 plus, which isn't a huge amount to have to cast. So probably 3 dice most of the time. But the odd thing is, normally you're aiming to get rid of a unit strength, or you're getting rid of its toughness. So if you want to shoot it, you definitely just want to get rid of its toughness. You don't care about its strength. But it does one or the other. It drops its strength or it drops its toughness. Okay, some situations you don't mind. You're kind of easy. You've got a strength 3, toughness 3 unit running at you. You don't really care. But if you've got a strength 8 unit, dropping their strength to 7, probably you've got no armor save and they're winning on 2s anyway. So it's no help to you. Similarly with toughness, if they're very low toughness, very high toughness, possibly dropping their toughness makes no difference, but dropping their strength would. So it can be a little bit situational there. It can be worth thinking about when you want to use it, if you want to use it. That's it. There's going to be a lot of combats when it's going to definitely be useful regardless. And on an 11 plus, that's worthwhile. That's going to be worthwhile most of the time. If you can pair it to Shamanism though, where Awaken the Beast is the 0 spell, and you can choose whether to increase your own strength or your own toughness. It's on a 6 plus or an 8 plus. Yeah, it seems that on this instance, the Thaumaturgy has been shortchanged. Dropping the enemy's strength or toughness is not dissimilar to increasing your own strength or toughness. It's going to have a similar effect on the result of the combat. But in Shamanism, you get to choose. In Smite the Unbeliever, you do not. So, yeah, and you've got a higher casting value. So I'm not sure that seems to be all that fair, especially if you've got the upside of scarification as an attribute in Shamanism, whereas you've got the downside of adding 1d MDU if you miscast in Thaumaturgy. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame, that one, but still, it's not a bad spell. Still, it's going to have it's going to change games on occasions. Next is one of the more interesting spells in the deck. In fact, probably one of the more interesting spells in the game. It's basically place a counter essentially anywhere on the board with a 96-inch range, and then at the end of every subsequent magic phase, roll a d6. On a 4 to 6, a lightning bolt, whatever, hits the ground, and for 2d6 plus however many counters there are, so potentially quite a big range, every unit suffers 2d6 strength 4 plus every counter. Now what happens on a 1 to 3? You add another counter. So you start with 1 counter, so your minimum 2d6 plus 1, so you're looking 8 or 9 inches, strength 5. So that's going to scare a lot of people. So that's a lot of stuff that's going to be hit. So this has a huge amount of uses, and back in 8th edition, obviously it's very similar to Comet of Cassandra, and that had so many different uses depending on what I was using it at. So this is particularly true now that war machines have a lower toughness, so you can put it in a group of war machines that are protected by infantry, put it in the middle, and it's going to take off most of those war machines now. So that's going to scare people. That's going to draw scrolls as well as Trial of Faith. So that's really, really nasty. But on top of that, you can control board space. If you've got a fighting army, put it down in amongst the units in an area you don't want them to be, like a wood or something that's going to break you steadfast, and you're going to force them out there or force them to take a heap of damage. If there's some terrain that gives them a buff, put it on the terrain and make them move away. So yeah, it has its applications like that. Similarly, if you've got a shooty sort of army, you can put it between you and the enemy so that you're effectively mining the no man's land. So if they walk forward, that's fine, but it's going to drop down and take out some units. The other use is this hits units regardless of if they're in combat, and it doesn't randomise if it hits units in combat. So if you've got a big, deep, steadfast unit and you want to chew through it quicker, putting it down behind the unit, if you know it's going to take you 2 or 3 turns, or likely to take you 2 or 3 turns to break the unit, and then it's going to hit the back of their unit, less likely to hit the front of your unit, and it's going to take out quite a lot of models. So yeah, a really, really useful spell, kind of only limited by your imagination. So now we get on to how Thaumaturgy could be used. As I say, I can really see it being used in sort of a combat wizard. So I'm particularly thinking about a Warriors of Chaos wizard. So reasonably easy to get them a 2-up armor save, and obviously a ward save's no problem at all. So I can definitely see this on something like that, because then Cleansing Fire is great because you don't mind being in combat, and you're probably going to be hanging around if you're in a unit of warriors. And Trial of Faith, obviously it's short range, you can push short forward and draw spells all the time, putting Wrath of God behind those units. So although it doesn't have a augment per se. It kind of does, because it's going to work as such. So, and then obviously it's got a couple of hexes which are going to work in that situation as well. So I like that from a combat point of view. That'd be great. And also Wrath of God, I can see using it as you can do it out of combat. So you can still cast even if your combat wizard's tied up. So yeah, I like that very much. Now on top of that, I'm really tempted to put the wizard into a unit of Chosen and take the Chosen of Change on that unit. So that means any spell, non-bound spell, you're re-rolling 1s and 2s. So that to me is where Thaumaturgy, I've really changed my mind about them. So you really need your wizard to be a high plus. So if you're a Wizard of Change, you're going to be +3 probably, and that means you only need to get 3 to get Cleansing Fire off. So if you're re-rolling 1s and 2s, you can probably chuck 1 dice at Cleansing Fire, very likely to get it off. So that's pretty good. Similarly, Trial of Faith, you'd probably get away with chucking 1 dice at the end of a phase. And even Speaking in Tongues, if you need a 5, you could chuck 1 dice or 2 dice at it. That means the Thaumaturgy downside of having the extra dice when you are miscasting doesn't come into it too much. It's still only 3 dice, 2 dice to cast. Similarly, the Chosen give you a couple of bound spells, so you can zap away with those if you're feeling concerned that you might miscast, and then that obviously mitigates that to some extent. Chuck big dice at them early, try and draw a couple of dispel dice out, and then you can small dice your spells at the end of the phase. So I really like that. I can really see that working. Similarly, the Skaven, if a seer takes some shards, then you decrease their dispel terms by minus D3, so it makes it harder for them to dispel the spells. So you can small dice it and then make it hard for them to dispel, even though you haven't chucked many dice at it. So there are definitely ways to mitigate that potential of adding dice. Even 13 plus for Wrath of God, I'd only ever throw 3 dice at it. You rely on the reroll 1s or reroll 1s and 2s to get it through, and then if you miscast, it's pretty unlikely on 3 dice, and you're only going up to 4 dice, so at worst hitting a 16 and not killing your wizard, just taking some of his wounds off. So yeah, I like Thaumaturgy. It's none of the spells in and of themselves seem overpowered, but it's a real chip away path, and it's gonna really make you think. So if you are going to cast Speaking in Tongues, get rid of their Inspiring Presence, potentially that's a complete game winner. Similarly, Cleansing Fire to chip away ranks from enemies when you've got monsters gone and you need to break their steadfast, or Wrath of God can do very similar. If you've got high toughness models, good wet armor saves, you don't mind too much if you Wrath of God yourself. Even if you've got MR, that can be worthwhile. So chuck in a big steadfast block of models, a bit of MR, some armor save, drop down a comet nearby, blow up all their chaff, but your unit comes through reasonably unscathed. So yeah, again, a nice little use of that. So yeah, I can definitely see myself running this in the near future. I'll certainly let you know in the battle reports when I do. So thanks for listening. Hope this has been helpful. Again, as always, comment in the boxes below or get in touch via warlockstower.com.